The Senior Bowl has been going on all week. Who are the standouts and the names to watch? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day every single day. I appreciate you all so very much. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. I am your host. My name is Luke. You can find me on Blue Sky at Luke Braun NFL. Let's get into some draft stuff. Yeah, we're not going to do a lot of draft stuff like every single day until after free agency, but I will poke at it a little. I am personally poking at players right now, and right now I'm watching mostly running backs. But that doesn't mean that it's not worth paying attention to stuff going on. Shrine Bowl, Senior Bowl is going on. I had a plan today to talk with somebody who was at the Senior Bowl. They unfortunately fell ill, so we'll talk to them later, but it's Tyler Forness. We'll get him on. We've had him on in the past. We'll have him on later, I think regularly during this draft season. I always love talking to Tyler. But for now, we can still talk about some of the guys that are getting like a lot of the buzz over there at the Senior Bowl. The Senior Bowl is something that I'm not a huge fan of as an evaluative tool. We'll still pay attention to it, but I also kind of want to share those thoughts. Before we get into any of that, I've got a couple of matters to mention. The defensive coordinator job in Jacksonville was something worth watching. The Jags actually had interviewed Durante Jones for that job, but they ended up giving it to Anthony Campanile. Packers linebackers coach. And so that went to, so the Vikings keep like dodging these bullets. The Saints haven't technically hired a head coach yet. Brian Flores has not been part of their process. So of course, we can pretty much hang our hats on Flores returning, but Grant Udinski's got like 4 offensive coordinator interviews, so we still are kind of sweating, like maybe losing a guy here or there, but the brain drain I kind of skipped the Vikings this year, focused a little more on the Lions, so I guess that's good for us. A couple other things. Yesterday, I did a show on Cam Bynum in the safety room. I said a couple things that were wrong I wanted to correct myself on. One, I got the draft class mixed up. Look, all right, it's been a long week. I started talking about last year's draft class as though it were this year's draft class. I looked up like a quick look at the safety class, and I was like, oh yeah, I remember that gopher safety we were talking about. And I was thinking of Coy Parrish, who's a sophomore. He's not even coming out. And then I mixed it up with Tyler Nubin, and then that tricked me into thinking that was this year. So that's my bad. Okay, that's on me. But this year's safety class is still one where there's like one guy, there's that Georgia guy that is going to be like a top 10 guy that you're not probably going to have any access to, and you probably wouldn't want to do that anyways, where the Vikings are. And then kind of a bunch of other like day 2 types. So I think still in spirit, the ultimate conclusion I still feel pretty good about. And then I also mentioned a franchise tag thing wrong. So the non-exclusive franchise tag and the exclusive franchise tag are different than the actual transition tag. The transition tag is a lot lower. That's the $15 million one I was advocating for, but there's not the 2 first-round picks that come back. That is the non-exclusive franchise tag, which is a different thing and is more expensive. The transition tag is a little bit of a riskier proposition, but still maybe something the Vikings might explore. But I'm not going to rehash that right now. Let's get into the Senior Bowl. So there is a name I have heard a ton about, and maybe that's just the circles that I'm like exposed to, but I feel like everyone's talking about Walter Nolan, and he has had a good Senior Bowl. So you're going to hear a lot about this name as well. This is going to be a guy, if anyone wants to mock a defensive tackle, like a true pass rushing defensive tackle to the Vikings, he goes to the Vikings at 24 in everyone's mock draft. Like, he feels like the name you pair with the Vikings if that's what you're doing. Right now, I've seen more people pairing offensive line to the Vikings, and I think here's the deal. I think like when it comes to those like media mocks, people's memory of the last thing they saw will fade over time, and then they'll look a little bit more at like roster holes. But a lot of the mocks that have come out in the last few weeks, the last thing in their mind was watching Sam Darnold take 9 sacks in the playoffs. So they go O-line and they just don't even give it a second thought. And most of these are, two sentences a pick, first round mock, puke it out in 30 minutes and go about your day. So it's been a lot of that, but I do think we'll see people kind of look at it and go, they could use an interior pass rusher. They could get somebody else that goes. So Walter Nolan is like, everybody calls him like he's the quick twitch guy. And I'm going to like really sit down and do some like study on him and really watch him and give you what my opinion on this is. So right now, all I'm giving you is kind of what consensus and I'm just trying to familiarize myself with what people are saying about the guy. And what people are saying is, this dude's very quick twitch. He's very, great get off the line, go beat somebody fast kind of guy. And that leads to a ton of disruption and production and stuff at the next level. And I think here's the thing. So he's 6'3", 293, and he's fast. Like that is immediately everybody's ears perk up when they hear a guy that fat, that big, be that fast and go, this must be like a total freaky athlete. For me, that doesn't always turn out, right? There's still a lot more boxes you have to check before I trust a prospect. But he's dunking on guys at the Senior Bowl. So what is the Senior Bowl? Well, the Senior Bowl is not the Combine. And a lot of the people at the Senior Bowl and the Shrine Bowl over in Vegas are players that did not get a Combine invite. Some of them are going to both. But there are a lot of players that are there trying to up their stock and actually earn a Combine invite by going to the Senior Bowl. It's one of the purposes of the event, but also just to be another showcase for draft talent. Arif Hassan did a big, long thing about the Senior Bowl and its predictive value. I'm going to talk about that a little later. But for now, think of it a little bit like the way you think about winning in the preseason. Because it's kind of a lot of the same guys. You're going to see a lot of these rookies playing in the preseason. Like it is just literally the same people, but it's also kind of the same level of talent. These are not, the Senior Bowl does not comprise everybody you're going to see starting in the NFL in 2 years. It's a lot of depth and backups, a lot of 5th, 6th rounders, guys that are going to be making the team on special teams. This is the middle meat of the draft to me. That's the way I think about the Senior Bowl and the Shrine Bowl, and then the NFLPA Collegiate Bowl, which I think has already happened, which they canceled a couple years ago, unfortunately, was where you would find like priority free agents. You'd find like total long shots. It was like the long shot bowl. And I always thought that was a cool idea, but they, I guess, haven't had it. The deal with Walter Nolan is, when is he letting up on a rep and some of the finer nuances of when to let up on a block, when to try to shed a block are like, and I'm not saying like an effort thing, and it's more about when you try to disengage, you're not putting as much pressure or intent, like physical pressure on the other guy. And if you do that early, you can end up kind of washed out of the play. It might look like you're like quitting on it or something like that, but really it's just you like kind of made a decision a little bit too zealously. And so then there's like a control thing. But this is your, knife through, get a big TFL kind of guy. I don't think a lot of what you think about him needs, if you already have an opinion on him that's more fleshed out than mine, I don't think him excelling at the Senior Bowl should have much of an impact on it. You either already liked him or you already didn't. And I think the Senior Bowl isn't something that does enough to confirm or deny that. And I'll talk more about that as well as some other standouts next up on Locked On Vikings. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by Gametime, the best place to find last-minute tickets. Look, if you are looking for something to do this weekend, no football on this weekend for the first time since like summer, hey, let's go to a Wolves game. Hey, let's pop into maybe a Wild game. Let's go to something, right? That is what Gametime is for. It's for last-minute tickets. It's for finding things at the last minute. Or if you're the kind of person that likes to watch the ticket prices and try to troll the market, well, Gametime's doing that constantly. You can just log on and see the best prices. The app's features have seat views, panoramics, so you can make sure you're okay with your view, and the best customer service policy in the ticketing industry. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Moving on here with the Locked On Vikings podcast. If you want more draft content, you can check out my Patreon page, patreon.com/LukeBraunNFL. I have put out one draft video. It's on Caleb Johnson. More to come. The next guy that I want to talk about, we're going to stay on the D-line, is Darius Alexander out of Toledo. This is an interesting one. Again, there's a clip of him just beating the heck out of a total idiot center. The snap is bad. The pass set is bad. The hands are bad. The pads are bad. It's like this dude, whatever this center is doing, it's a terrible rep, and he just crushes it. And everybody kind of gets excited. And you can kind of see where I'm headed with this when I talk about my issues with the Senior Bowl, but I want to talk about the players first. So this is a really interesting guy because he is primarily a run defense player, unlike Walter Nolan, who you're drafting him to get pass rush. Right, and then the smaller nuances of run defense are going to be a little bit less consistent, but he's got the size so you can work with it. Right, with Darius Alexander, you're drafting run production, so this guy's not a first or second rounder. This guy is going to be like closer to like a fifth, sixth. That's at least where he's getting mocked right now. But he was like unanimously the guy that maybe was like he's the single guy on everyone's list. There's a tight end too. I'm not even going to bother with it. But like this guy's on everyone's list for who excelled at the Senior Bowl. So maybe his stock will rise here in the coming days as people, publish their post-Senior Bowl mocks and stuff like that. You can do Grinding the Mocks, the Benjamin Robinson site. That's always a great resource to see like how the perception of these guys changes, which is funny because like all the tape we have on him is out. You can go do it, but as people discover him, the national conversation morphs so much over 3 months, even though very little new information is presented over 3 months. But this is part of that new information. For a run-stopping guy, he does have a pass rush. Probably not going to be the best pass rusher on your team, but he does have like a couple of moves. He does something. The things that are going to get him to fall is just he's got a little bit of inconsistency. His pads get high. He can get his eyes lost. I'm taking that from Lance Zierlein. And also that he hasn't been that fast of a stunter. And if he's not a stunter, that might take him completely out of contention for the Vikings because that's like the premier way for the Vikings to get interior pressure, unless they decide to change their philosophy there. And I actually think spamming stunts all day long killed him against the Rams. Those stunts took too long. So with Darius Alexander, if he's here, that exacerbates that problem, or does it tell you that they're going to decide that's not a problem? They're going to let this dude cook and try to win one-on-one. Now, here's the other thing. Late in the draft, we're probably not even thinking about it. You're not thinking about like defensive philosophy too much that late in the draft. By that point, you're just trying to get in people who are talented at something. Early in the draft, you want people who do everything for you, who are able to do your pass rush, who are able to execute all your play calls. You want people who don't have issues. By the late parts of the draft, you don't find people who don't have issues. So you need people that do one thing. And you're starting to find, at that point, you're starting to look for like, okay, but he does have at least a little bit of a pass rush for a DT, and that's it. And yeah, I know he has all these other issues. Who doesn't? But at least he's got something that makes it worth the price of admission. So it'll be curious. We'll see how he how he ascends in the mock world. Some other guys that went that improved their stock, I guess. Kentucky corner Maxwell Hairston was another one of Daniel Jeremiah called him another of the buzzy names. He's getting like a second round vibe everywhere I look. People put him in like the 40s. He's like a long press corner. He's 5'11", but long arms. So like a long armed, ball skills, kind of lanky man corner, slender man type of guy. Not like 6'4", like Kyrie Jackson was like 6'3". No, he was 6'4". That is a different kind of mold that they were going for with that pick, but 5'11" is plenty. That's good enough. And if you can be long and have good ball skills, he's like a lot of production, a lot of interceptions, right? So a lot of big plays, and had a good week and helped himself out. He hasn't been much of a zone guy. He's much more of a man guy when you get into zone, and you have to start doing like the thinking that comes with that, and eye discipline and, precision with where you're backing up. That's where there's learning to do, is what I will say. So, hey, that kind of represents a crossroads on one of the other defensive things that I've been talking about for the last couple weeks. Are we going to try to man cover more? The Vikings did man cover more down the stretch last year, but it kind of reached its breaking point, and there was just so much that Shaq Griffin and Stephon Gilmore could do. And in case you didn't listen to those other ones, here's the deal. The corners, they played fine for the job that they were asked to do. But make no bones about it, the Vikings were hiding their corners all year long. And when they stopped hiding their corners, they got exposed by the Lions and Rams. They were, like, Stephon Gilmore was not a shell of himself. There's a reason that you did not have him man covering all the live long day. He gave up slants, like when it did turn into man stuff, like he would give up the comeback all the time. And same with Shaq Griffin. Those guys were not, pillars. They were not like load-bearing members of the defense. They were just doing a zone, doing their job, and that was fine, and it was cheap, so it worked. But if the Vikings want to be more serious on defense, forgetting the interior pass rush, I think getting serious in the secondary is probably the thing they can do to help themselves most, especially against Ben Johnson, who they still have to play twice a year now. A lot less talent on that Bears roster than on the Lions, but still, right? And Ben Johnson's offense has so many ways to crush your zone, where if you go man and those tools get taken away, it's a much simpler task. It's not easy, obviously, but it's a much more straightforward task to slow that down. But if you got corners who can't keep up with Rome Odunze and whatever's left of Keenan Allen, and I don't know if DJ Moore's even going to be in Chicago, but like if you have corners who can't keep up with those guys, you probably have another defense that's just zoning behind blitzes all day long, and you're going to get shredded. So I think going for a press corner like Maxwell Hairston, to me, that signals, okay, we're going to try to be more serious as a multiple defense. And we're going to try to do man behind blitzes and zone behind blitzes. And we're going to try, to have a lot of different things. Enough pieces, I think, are coming back on defense, especially among that front seven, where I think you can be a little bit more complicated with your installs, and you can, I think, install more concepts. And you just got to bring some corners up to speed. And I think going for a more man cover oriented guy is a signal that the Vikings are maybe considering that, and that would make me very happy. That said, this guy's probably not going to be someone you want to take at number 24 if he's, that bad at, if he's like that raw at zone, you probably don't. So this is like, what if they traded out a pick 24? Maybe they end up with him, that kind of guy. One last guy, and then I'll just talk about the Senior Bowl in general. And it's like predictive value and stuff, is Azaria Thomas is what I'll go with. He's another big press cover corner. He's out of Florida State. He's 6'1", 191, right? So he's still not like huge. He's not Xavier Rhodes-sized guy, but that is plenty of size. And the thing about him is he did not get a ton of ball production. He played it, I think, a little more conservative is what it sounds like. And I'd be curious to watch this, although I don't think I'm looking too hard at the corners this year in the draft. But he was very much not a go-for-broke guy. He would be in a press alignment, but he would very seldom try to actually jam. He would just turn his hips, bail out, go make a play, be there, be a pass breakup kind of guy, but his losses would come when he would get beat off the release because he wouldn't contest it enough. So like a conservative corner. So if the Vikings aren't listening to all the stuff I just said and they're going, nope, we're going to do 3 deep, 3 under, we're going to do all kinds of fire zone and hot coverage again, and we're just going to like roll with the same exact thing. Azaria Thomas would be a great fit for that. He kind of comes in that same vibe. Maybe even some people even have him more as a third rounder. Maybe he's the kind of guy, maybe falls to you at your comp pick, or you trade up, 2 spots for that kind of thing. But another guy who had a good Senior Bowl. So there's a couple names for you to chew on, but the Senior Bowl is something that I take with a huge grain of salt, and I'll explain why next. This episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by PrizePicks. The big game is almost here, and there is no better way to make it more exciting than with PrizePicks, the best place to play daily fantasy sports. I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going to have like 3 different PrizePicks plays. I'm going to have one that's like mostly the Chiefs, one that's like mostly the Eagles, one that's like all the tight ends or something like that. I'm going to have all kinds of fun. And right now, they have one for Jalen Hurts. If he gets 1 passing yard, you just like win that square. So throw that in your play, and it's just better. It's just a good promo thing that they do all the time. It's actually, it's Patrick Mahomes, not Jalen Hurts. But either way, you can put that in, and you can get Saquon Barkley more than half a touchdown, and you can get 2.5 times your money. That's one play. I'll probably just lock that in right there, and you can come live or die on it with me. Whatever it is, you can find PrizePicks on the App Store or Google Play Store or whatever, or at prizepicks.com. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. It's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. All right, let's move on. Let's get real with the Locked On Vikings podcast here. The Senior Bowl and Shrine Bowl, and the Combine, but to a lesser extent, because I think the Combine has a little bit less emphasis on one-on-ones. But I kind of think that they can trick you. So Arif San posted a big, long piece about the Senior Bowl and the point of it. And a couple of years ago, he did a giant feature on Eric Galko and Jim Nagy, the 2 guys that run the Shrine Bowl and Senior Bowl, and like their extraordinarily juicy rivalry. Please go read that article. It is way messier than you could ever have hoped for it to be. It's awesome. But the point of these games is a showcase, right? It's for you to see someone you hadn't heard of before and go, oh, maybe that guy is first round talent. That's like the thesis of at least the Senior Bowl. And every year there are Senior Bowl standouts, and some of them work. And sometimes it's Aaron Donald, sometimes it's Denzel Mims. Like it's hit or miss, right? Just like with everything in the draft, there's no good predictor. If there were, we'd all be using it, and not, there'd be no questions. But beyond all that, I'm not here to tell you that like what happens at the Senior Bowl doesn't matter. Don't bother. Don't pay attention to it. Blah, blah, blah. Not saying that at all. Rather, I think the way that we engage with it, we just have to be careful. And especially when it comes to a one-on-one. I think in an all-star game, making a good play in an all-star game is very much can be an indicative thing, right? Everybody in that game's going to play hard because they all know that they could raise their draft stock. They could go from undrafted to drafted. They could raise their draft stock. If you go from a 6th round pick to a 4th round pick, you went from maybe I'll make the team to I'm almost certainly making the team. And that represents a 6-digit amount of money for a kid that maybe's never sniffed that in his life. Like this is potentially a life-changing moment for them. And they're all going to play like that. Not to mention just their competitors, right? You don't get to this level without being really, really, really excited to even just like in a practice scrimmage, like go, all out. Ham sandwich theory. So when it comes to the game itself, you can probably learn things, but you got to be careful with what you're learning, right? A lot of these players at the Senior Bowl are bad. That's just a reality that we kind of forget about in the draft. And I find myself leaning more on the hater side of a lot of draft prospects. Like I find myself more negative than consensus way more often than I find myself more positive than consensus. And I think that that's appropriate, as unfun as it is. I think that that's appropriate. If you just go look at a random draft, any year in the last few, you'll find a few superstars in the first round. You'll find a few busts in the first round. You'll find some guys in the middle, and it's going to be reasonably evenly distributed most of the time. And you get to day 2, and you're going to probably find, a handful of studs, a whole bunch of guys you didn't even realize were on that team now, and a bunch of people that are like out of the league now, depending on how far back you go. And then you get to day 3, and you're going to find like 2 people that are names you even recognize, and the rest of them are like, is that guy in the league? Who is that? that's the way that this distributes, right? I'm probably not telling you news, but the point is, what we're looking at right now is more of that late day 2, early day 3 guy, if that. Some of these guys are not going to make NFL teams. Some of these guys are going to go to the Senior Bowl, have a bad week, go undrafted, not make a team, and they'll be working at Kroger's in, a year. Like, that's just the brutal reality of this business. So, with that in mind, when you have somebody like a Walter Nolan, somebody that's, first round height, going up against a guy that maybe isn't going to make the team in a one-on-one situation, I'm not saying that that's not informative, right? Because if Walter Nolan loses that rep, okay, whoa, we got to talk about why that happened, right? So it's not that it's not informative. It's that you got to be careful. You just have to ask yourself, am I taking the right lesson from this? And that will, I think, make you a more reserved and reasonable draft analyst that doesn't put the weight of the world on every rookie. And I think as a society, like as an NFL watching community, we put way too much expectations on rookies all the time. I personally don't think it's concerning at all if a first round player doesn't sits on the bench for his first year. Like, I think that's perfectly normal. And guys can come out of that and be good the next year. Depends on, look, if the guy in front of them is struggling and the new guy doesn't come in at all, then it's an issue. But if you got a superstar in front and, the quarterback sits, if it's like a Falcons situation, right? Nobody is holding it against Michael Penix that he didn't play until the end of the year. And if Kirk Cousins didn't fall apart, he wouldn't have played at all. And I think that's perfectly normal. And those situations exist. And then you get to the second and third round, people are looking at third round picks going, where is that guy's impact? What do you mean, where's that guy's impact? He's a rookie. Relax. Especially with third round picks or day 3 picks. If they make your team, late day 3 kind of guys, 7th rounders, if they're on special teams, you're doing okay. The expectations, I think, are totally out of whack. So we have to remember who we're looking at here. But the other big issue is so much of the Senior Bowl's discourse is rooted in the one-on-ones that get posted to social media. And I think just social media is a problem. Surprise, surprise. It ruined everything. But one-on-ones are so bad as evaluative tools. Over the aggregate, they can have some predictive power. Again, Arif did, he does this in camp, used to do this in camp every year. He would chart O-line, D-line one-on-ones, and that data would actually have some predictive value, over the macro. But singular clips, you gotta be good at telling who is a good player and who is a bad player. All of this prefacing is me getting to this point. You have to be good at telling whether the bad player made a bad play or the good player made a good play. And it is not always both. When it comes to these zero-sum things like an O-line, D-line one-on-one, there's a winner, there's a loser. You can't do a good thing in a one-on-one without the other guy eating an L, right? And it is a skill, I think, to differentiate the winner made a good play versus the loser made a bad play. Different things, and it's skillful to differentiate. This is at the crux of, I think, so much of the statistical noise in football. As a brief aside, most of the analytics studies you'll get, the scatter plots you'll see on Twitter, that kind of stuff, are going to have an R squared of 0.2 or 0.18 or something like that. And that's actually a pretty good, 0.25 is good for football. It's seen as good for football. But if you took that into an intro to stats, in a math program at a college, they would laugh you out the door. And that's because football is just this inherently noisy thing. So people doing analytics understand that it's inherently noisy and adjust their expectations accordingly. But that doesn't mean that those things are more predictive. They're just predictive enough for football. And one of the reasons I think that those correlations are looser is because football is zero sum. And two players can have a good rep and one of them loses, and then that guy's stats take a hit. And it happens hundreds of times all across all the games, all across everything. It's everywhere. That's why there's noise. So it's something you have to just get good at. And the answer to, well, okay, how do I do that is play to play, position to position. It's a long thing. And it's like asking someone, how do I code? Like, what do you mean? How do I code? This is not like, I'm not going to post a recipe like you're baking muffins. Like, it's a thing. It's a skill. And so I look at a rep. It's one of the Darius Alexander reps that I saw everybody posting about this one. And I see a center. I don't know who the center is, taking a step pretty far up into this guy's space, right? Which you're actually kind of supposed to do on like a short set. You're supposed to put your right foot kind of basically knee his crotch. Essentially, you're supposed to like step on him, step into his space, basically take the fight to him. Okay, sure, that's all fine. And then for no reason, kick slides back away from him, giving him space. Pads go up, hands hit, glance off the top of the shoulder pads, hands get defeated, and he's cooked. And it's like, okay, so you put yourself in a reasonable position and then totally put yourself out of that position. And Darius Alexander didn't have to do a lot to win that rep. So to me, I look at that and I say, okay, bad player made a bad play more than good player made a good play. It's not always going to be that way. Sometimes, you see, oh, wow, what a great way to, what a great swim move that guy had, or what a great bull rush that guy had. Wow, look how strong he is. Like, it's not always that way, but you have to look at every single play and make the determination for yourself. What am I looking at here? What is, which player is responsible for the result of this play, whether it's, a player on the losing or the winning side of it. And one-on-ones do such a bad job of giving you that. It also takes things totally out of context. That center usually is going to have help. So he might have a habit of shuffling to the left because he knows he always has help on his right because he played with a really good right guard or something like that. So you take out of that context as well. Same thing with wide receiver and defensive back one-on-ones. This drives me nuts all the time. Wide receivers in these showcase games will do these like 3-second releases with like, it's just this long and arduous like head fake and then a shuffle and then another step and then like all this other stuff. And it's like, you would never get away with that in a game. Plus that corner is going to have help over the top or help to the inside. Like this is just not a simulation of NFL action. And everyone oohs and ahs at how much separation the guy generates in a situation that's like giving him like 3 different advantages. So just be aware. It doesn't mean you don't learn anything from that. You can still see how agile the guy is. You can still see how much he sinks his hips when he's about to break off a route. You can still look at stuff and tell, but don't look at the result of those plays and ooh and ah at it and make a draft case out of that. It's going to lead you astray. It's going to bring you a lot more Denzel Mims than Aaron Donalds. Does that make sense? All right. I've droned on enough about this. I will talk to you all next week. And as always, Skull.